The European Parliament has voted to designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, pointing to Moscow's repeated strikes on civilian targets in Ukraine. The move appears to be largely symbolic, however, as the EU does not currently have a legal structure for the designation of state sponsors of terrorism. The US, by contrast, does have such a system and has declined to include Russia on it due to concerns that such a move could lead to unintended legal consequences. Well, for more, I'm joined now by DW's Barbara Vasil in Strasbourg. Barbara, fill us in here. What does this declaration by the European Parliament mean?
It is a political signal. That's all it is, really, because you rightly said that there is no legal shape, form or a basis for this in European law. So they more or less made it up, the initiators, who you find among right-wing conservatives and nationalist parties here in the European Parliament. They made it up as they went along, and they thought, couldn't we do this to Russia, apply this to Russia, just as the United States do towards North Korea and for instance, Cuba. So the European Union so far only has organizations listed like Hamas and others as sponsors of terrorism, and this is the first time it happens. But it has no legal consequences because for that, the states, the member states of the European Union would have to adopt this resolution. And they won't. I mean, that much is totally clear. Can you imagine Germany or France adopting this and saying, OK, and we're also ready to cut off diplomatic relations to Russia? No, they still hope for negotiations and some sort of diplomatic end to the war. So they're not going to do this. But a majority, not a very big one, but a majority of the European Parliament has decided today to send this signal to Moscow. We think you are a terrorist state.
Okay, so it's largely symbolic, a signal, as you say, a political signal, but still the move is extraordinary, Barbara. How did the vote come about?
The move is extraordinary. If you look into the resolution, pages and chapters of it, and you read through it, it of course gives you a feeling, if you respond emotionally, to say yes, indeed, because what parliamentarians are doing here are sort of listing up the endless alleged atrocities from torture and sexual torture, rape and other things, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bombing civilian buildings, executions, killings of civilians in the thousands. I mean, it is all very clearly and very in great detail put on a list. And then at the end they say, yes, we draw the conclusion that this is against international law, this is against the law of war, the treaties that have been signed. And so Russia is a terrorist state, basically. They simply draw that conclusion. The problem here is the legal side, as we mentioned. The political side is fairly clear, but the European Parliament was hugely split on this because the Social Democrats here, for instance, there are some who voted for it, but there are many who voted against it, saying it makes no sense. It's just not a step forward. It's simply sort of digging in and saying, well, we hate you, Russia, politically, but it doesn't really lead us to a solution. And that, of course, others are supporting it. And so the Parliament was, throughout all the political groups here, really split down the middle on this.
Barbara, thank you so much. Our correspondent Barbara Vasil there in Strasbourg.